Welcome to another episode of ajvc Behind the Scenes. I'm your host Chetan, and I have with me Mazen and Omkar. In this episode, we will discuss our latest piece, Can India Consume D2C Brands? So, something interesting happened recently. One of our colleagues at ajvc told us that one of his cousin bought a D2C brand in a tier 2 city. And of late, we've also been noticing a lot of D2C players like Mama Earth and Mensa, who raised $50 million in a seed round, head the news. And we think that this is a very interesting space that we should definitely talk about. And that's what we did this week. So, without any further ado, Omkar, um, let's take a step back. Can you tell us how did all of this start? Where did it begin, and what was the story here?
Sure, Chetan. So, I think while reading about D2C, something very interesting came up that how it all started was not because of some company started a direct to consumer brand and then it grew up. No, it all started because of one uh, huge company that was Flipkart. So it was 2007, and Binny Bansal, who was a co-founder of Flipkart, had just joined Amazon through a referral of Sachin Bansal, his friend from IIT Delhi. And 8 months in, he realized that Amazon was not his thing. He did not like the work that they were doing there, and Amazon was not yet in India. It hadn't started its e-commerce business in India, and he felt that his job wasn't fulfilling enough. And Binny and Sachin were good friends by then, although they were like 1 year apart in when they graduated. But at Amazon, they became good friends because of working together. And then by 2007, I think only 4% of Indians use the internet. And you'd think that there weren't e-commerce website then, but there were a lot of e-commerce websites present. And the first thing that Sachin and Binny made when they decided to leave the jobs at Amazon and start their own company was make a website that compared prices across different e-commerce websites, so that the consumers could choose, what's the best price for them to buy online. And but they soon realized that no, that was they had skipped a step. The e-commerce websites themselves did not have good UX user experience and had terrible customer support and almost like very horrible user interfaces. And they knew that they could do better. So they launched something called an online bookstore, and they called it Flipkart. And that's how this whole D2C uh, brigade had started actually. And the story of how they got their first customer is also fascinating. You should go and read up about it on their website. And by around 2009, they raised their first ever round of funding, $1 million from Assel. Till then, they were bootstrapped. And Flipkart soon pivoted to an e-commerce website that sold all kinds of products. And then this would, like I said, turn out to be the trailblazer for an entirely new way of doing business. That is D2C, that selling directly to the consumer. And as we know that the Indian markets lag behind the US markets by almost 5 years. And as Flipkart scaled, people started realizing that uh, India has potential to grow e-commerce businesses. So in like a few years, Amazon also came in and started their own business here of e-commerce. And the reason the brands were starting to shift to D2C was because of the promises D2C made. In e-commerce, the major like the people who had control over the supply chain had monopoly. And if you don't have control over the supply chain, you had to rely on people who had control over the supply chain. And D2C got rid of all of those things. D2C gave people basically three major strong points to shift to D2C. The first one was control over the distribution channel, which was that the companies had direct and complete control over the distribution channel as to how they would want to sell their products, where they would want to sell it, and then how many products they want to sell, and keeping track of all those things. And basically this got rid of the profit that they had to give to the middlemen, and they had a higher margins because of that. That was the third third major point. And the second point was that the company had no longer had to pay the intermediary, so they had to keep they could keep a more significant profit share. So these were the 3 points. The first one was they had more control over distribution channel. Second one was, since they had fewer middlemen, they could keep more profits for themselves. And third one was, since they had more proximity to the consumers, like the customers, and they could see the whole customer's journey. They had deeper insights into how the customers behaved, and they could then ideate faster and iterate faster to make the products better and more customer centric. But even after all these promises, D2C did not take off in India. This was around 2009, 2010. And the reason for that was lack of trust. So if you remember the time in 2010, Flipkart had just people had just started buying things on Flipkart and started trusting online stores because of Flipkart's amazing customer support. But internet penetration was still in its nascent stages. Smartphones were still a luxury that only a few could enjoy, and logistics costs were through the roof. So if, say, I start a company and I had to provide something directly to the consumer, I had to put in a lot of money. And but still, in around in about 2 years, we would see companies like Sugar, Fabbag, and Zivame and Lenskart and similar companies start the D2C uh, trailblazer basically. And we'll talk about that in a while. And so let's talk about some numbers. So like I said, the internet penetration was very less, and by around 2013 there were 100 million internet users in India. This was pre-Jio, so Reliance had not yet launched their lucrative plan of free internet. So the internet access was lesser in the remote areas. And so all the people who use the internet, only 60% of people use social media then. And then Facebook had the highest reach among all platforms. And the reason we are talking about social media is D2C brands primarily used social media to reach consumers right now. And then that was not the case. Then they had to think of uh, different ways to reach the consumer, maybe billboards or TV ads or radio ads, something like that. But and those spaces were dominated by large brands like Nike, Adidas, Pepsi, Canon. And so it was still tough for D2C brands to come into the whole ecosystem. And the old system is what we call the indirect brand economy, where a product exchanged multiple hands before reaching the customer, right? So if, say, I manufacture something, I need to give it to the wholesaler, then the distributor, then the retailer, and then finally reaches the consumer. And the D2C promise, like we talked about in the top part, is we could directly reach the consumer. Like manufacturer, then I have my own online store or offline store, and I reach the consumer. I had more access to data. And this was a direct brand economy. And the brands that I mentioned, Sugar, Fabbe, and Lenskart and Zivame, these were starting to capitalize on this direct brand economy. And these early players capitalized on changing customer attitudes in India. And the rises, like the incomes are also rising, and exposure to ideas and technologies was at an all-time high. And consumers, especially in urban areas, had evolved and expected a seamless shopping experience across every channel. So every channel, like if you open your phone and log on to Flipkart, or if you go to an offline store to buy something, or if you open your website and log on to some particular brand's website and you had to buy something, the experience should be seamless. That was the expectation that the consumer had. And the D2C revolution was already there in US. Like we had mentioned that the Indian market lags by almost 5 years from the US market, and the companies like Dollar Shave Club were going viral with the commercials in the US, and it was like the poster boy for D2C in the US. And building a store and reaching customers online was easier than ever before in the US because of one or two specific companies, that was Shopify and Amazon. And these companies, Shopify is basically a company that helped brands sell their products online by making an e-commerce store for them. And Amazon, everyone knows about Amazon, that anyone could sell their products on Amazon. And these two companies launched in India in 2013. And this is the time when D2C finally began taking off in India. And the reason it started taking off is because now businesses could build their own products and own stores in at minimal costs, right? Because of Shopify and Amazon, they could sell it directly, and like it was a few clicks away to make your own store and then sell things online. And not only it was cheaper, but Shopify also allowed individual store owners to use sophisticated analytical tools. So we talked about easy access to consumers in the when we talked about the promises that D2C gave, and this analytical tool basically helped uh, brands to capitalize on whatever information they got from the consumer and iterate faster on the products that they had. And individual retailers could see and understand revenue by traffic streams, and understand which products were selling, which were not selling, and which products they wanted to push up, maybe help cross sell other products and all those things. And uh, around 2014, it was still a challenge to ship economically across India, and companies like Delivery, Blue Dart, DHL, and Ecom Express were starting to emerge. They were still early, but they were there. And local infrastructure was making it possible for brands to fulfill orders at scale. So the stage was set, and Shopify and Amazon had accelerated everything. And we were just there, and it was almost there. And with the social media penetration increasing day by day, brands are also started capitalizing social media to sell themselves and create basically a cult around the brand. And this was when we thought that there was a maybe something needed to change, something, because most of the brands already knew what they needed to do for being successful in D2C, and many brands were already doing it. So innovation was the need of the hour, and I think Mazin will cover how we changed from here.
Thank you so much, Omkar. That was a very fascinating story of how D2C sort of got started in India. Technology has always been a big enabler, and in this case, you can see it right in front of your eyes. With increasing internet penetration, with tools like Shopify and Amazon, allowing people to create digital real estate for themselves where they can host their products, and also giving them rich data and analytics that is super important when you're selling something online. And also with third party last mile delivery operators, allowing them to ship their products, things just became a lot easier. And I think brands started proliferating. And as you rightly said, what I think we'd like to know next is, now that the base has been set up for brands to go set up shop online, how did they sort of innovate and differentiate themselves? Mazen, could you throw some light on this?
Yeah, thanks, Chetan. So, like you said, in 2012, it was revolutionary to reach customers on social media. But by 2016, that was just table stakes. You had intense competition from data-rich brands, as you mentioned. An individual could now get online relatively easily. So looking for an edge, a new strategy started to emerge. It's called omni-channel marketing. And what that really means is putting the user at the center of the experience. You want all your different channels working together. One example of that is if you have a user that starts shopping, or puts something in their cart, doesn't actually check out, you can retarget them through a Facebook ad, for example, remind them of your brand, get them to go back to their cart and complete that purchase. And so you're customizing experiences around what the user is experiencing. And what happened as a result of this that was quite interesting was you saw brands like Lenskart and Nykaa that started as disruptors now getting into physical stores, because they wanted to create more trust. They wanted people to see their brand more visibly. And so you sort of saw this movement towards creating trust as a brand through giving customers an exceptional experience across all platforms. And so you got to this point where even this, customers were at the core, and companies were continuing to innovate, but they needed to do more. Companies needed to find a way to differentiate themselves. And so you saw a lot of companies getting creative. Dollar Shave Club was obviously the poster boy, as Omkar mentioned, and their YouTube video went viral. It was just the founder in his warehouse making a video, racked up 25 million views, and subsequently their $1 billion exit was an inspiration for a lot of Indian brands. And one of my favorite stories, as Indian brands also started to get creative, is WakeFit. They started a sleep internship offering students 10 lakhs to just sleep for a couple of months, which really got attention to their product and went viral. And so it was almost a badge of honor for a lot of founders being able to say that, I built this company without spending any money on paid advertising. And what you saw as a result of that was the emergence of the Indian influencer. Indian influencers in general helped provide a personal touch, help brands connect with customers at a more intimate level. And with that, you saw subscription models emerge and this next wave of growth. The entire direct-to-consumer space had transformed, and things that were really hard before, like setting up a website, now took a few minutes. People could get online faster, had much richer data, were able to reach customers at the exact moment. And so you saw a lot of innovations. Nykaa could deliver fashion to customers' doorsteps. You had unconventional business models like Licious that started selling meat directly to consumers. And companies like Boat that challenged the status quo started building speakers and selling them to consumers. And so you had this solid business models that were kind of backed by solid traction and a growing consumer side as well. And like as of now, there are about 600 brands across D2C sectors, and it's 75% of them in the fashion sector, which is surprising. So you see this huge kind of boom in the fashion sector, but overall, with so many brands and such intense competition, companies really had to build a strong moat. They had to find a way to differentiate themselves. And the way that they started to do this was through building communities. Communities helped companies retain customers for longer, because with intense competition, it wasn't just higher acquisition costs. It was also retention was a bigger problem for brands. And so by adding communities into the mix, brands could create a much stronger connection with investors. And now with this space maturing, we saw a bunch of investors coming into the space. We had proven business models. And actually, if you look at the numbers, 2020 saw $1.6 billion in funding across 100 brands. It had taken D2C brands about 30% of the time that it took traditional brands to get to that 100 crore in revenue number. And these companies were growing faster. And so we got to this point, where the pandemic happened and this D2C industry that was booming now came to a crashing halt. With physical lockdowns, it was difficult to ship. But what came out of that whole thing, as it became harder for people to go out and shop, we sort of saw this re-emergence of the direct-to-consumer brand. And when we think about the outlook for D2C in India, it's currently at a like $5-6 billion industry, and we predict huge growth. I mean, our estimate is in the next 4 to 5 years, this market could get to about 62 billion. Definitely a lot to be optimistic about. The industry, direct-to-consumer industry, has grown exponentially over the last couple of years, and we expect that to just continue going into the future.
Thanks, Mazen, for that. As you all can see, I think we hit a few roadblocks at the start of the decade for launching D2C brands, but now they have come back full circle, and they have now become enablers for other businesses. And that is a pretty amazing thing. As we enter this new decade, D2C brands are just getting bigger, better, and sexier. So thank you, folks, for tuning into this episode of a Junior VC Unfiltered. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we hope to see you next week.